Oh dear. Let's stop pretending this is complicated. I'm just reading an article in the Daily Mail. An 82-year-old man found with 75,000 images of child abuse. Not a handful, not something ambiguous. Tens of thousands. Categorised, stored, revisited. Material so severe that it includes the worst category. Infants, babies. Kind of content that most people can't even comprehend exists, let alone sit and consume. And what does he say when he's caught? He says he enjoys it. Not misunderstood, not confused, not accidental. He enjoys it. The police raid his house. He carries on. That's the part, really, that should end any debate. Because whatever the narrative is, whatever narrative gets built in a courtroom afterwards, remorse, shame, rehabilitation, you have to square it with that fact. He didn't stop, he didn't recoil, he didn't suddenly realise the gravity of what he was doing. He carried on. And after all of that scale, after the admission, after the continuation, what does the system do? Gives him a suspended sentence. Yes, hello, welcome to the channel. It is I, Chris, with a K. I hope everyone's well. So yeah, unbelievable what I'm reading. As I said in the introduction, has been given a suspended sentence, no prison. And the reason given for his lack of behind bars? His age. I'm sorry, how old was Rolf Harris when he went in prison? And the judge said it outright. If he were younger, he would have been sent to prison. Same crimes, same evidence, same behaviour. The only difference, the number of years he's been alive. So what does that actually mean in practice then? It means the system is not calibrating punishment to the harm. It's calibrating to the individual standing in front of it. It's saying that two identical acts can produce completely different outcomes. Not because of what was done, but because of who did it. Cool, with that kind of two-tier judging, he has to be Labour, or as I like to say, Labia, because they're all a bunch of cunts. That's not justice. That's conditional accountability at best. And when you take a step back, it gets even worse. Because these aren't just images. That word is almost too clean for what is being described. Every single one of those files represents something that actually happened. A child who was exploited, a moment that should never have existed. And that moment didn't just happen in isolation. It was recorded, distributed, and consumed. That's the part that people try to mentally separate, but you can't. There's no supply without demand. Even the judge acknowledges that. Without people like him, these acts would not be happening at the same scale. That's not a fringe opinion. That's stated in the courtroom. The system itself recognises the link. But I also have to say, with sentencing like that, a big part of this problem is also the judges. So let's line that up properly. The system recognises that consumption fuels the abuse. It recognised that the individual consumed it on such a huge, massive scale. It recognises that he continued with his dirty practices even after he was caught the first time. And it also recognises the severity of the material. And still, they decide not to remove him from society? I think some judges' laptops need to be investigated. Because at that point, you're not looking at a misunderstanding. You're looking at a system making a conscious decision to step back. And then comes the usual script. He's ashamed. He's sorry. There's a prospect of rehabilitation. Well, let me stop you there, because there's only one kind of safe child abuser, and that's a dead one. These phrases get rolled out like they carry weight on their own. But what do they actually mean when you place them next to facts? Shame doesn't continue after the police raids. Remorse doesn't sit there and download more of the same material. Rehabilitation isn't something that you declare, it's something demonstrated. And nothing in this timeline demonstrates it. So what you actually end up with is this kind of courtroom theatre where language is used to soften the reality rather than reflect it. And meanwhile, the scale of what actually happened goes under the radar. It gets pushed into the background. 75,000. Let that number sit for a second. Because it's so large, it almost becomes abstract. And that's dangerous. Because when something becomes abstract, it becomes easier to downplay. But if you break it down bit by bit, it becomes clear. This wasn't passive. This was habitual, repeated and embedded. This was somebody building and maintaining a collection over time. And the system looks at that and says, suspended sentence. Now, what kind of message does that send? Not just to the public, but anybody operating in the same space. If age becomes a mitigating factor, bearing in mind most child abusers, paedophiles are of age, but if it comes enough to override scale, persistence and direct admission, then what exactly is the deterrent? What is the line that actually triggers real consequences? Because here it clearly wasn't volume, it clearly wasn't the severity, it clearly wasn't the continuation after arrest, not arrest. So what is it? That's the question that cases like this force into the open. And the uncomfortable answer is that the system doesn't always operate in the logic that most people would assume it does. It talks about harm, it describes harm, it even condemns harm. But when it comes to acting proportionately, it introduces variables which subsequently dilute the outcome. Age becomes one of those variables. And once you accept that, you then have to follow it through to its conclusion. Because if age can reduce consequences at this level, then what you're effectively saying is that the longer somebody exists, the more insulated that they can become from the full weight of accountability. That's not protection, that's imbalance. And it creates a situation where the system appears more concerned with the condition of the offender than the reality of the offence. And now we mention that word again. Take a step back and look at the structure. You have a process that identifies harm clearly, links cause and effect clearly, acknowledges ongoing behaviour clearly, and then produces an outcome that doesn't match any of those acknowledgements. That's no small gap. That's a structural contradiction. Because if the words in court do not align with the actions taken, then words become meaningless. They become performance rather than principle. And that's where frustration turns into something much deeper, because people expect a justice system to do one basic thing: reflect the seriousness of what happened in the outcome that it delivered. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but at least recognisably. And when it doesn't, when it openly states the seriousness and then sidesteps it, you don't just get disagreement. You get a complete loss of confidence in what the system's actually there to do. Because from the outside, it starts to look like the system isn't capable of recognising harm, articulating harm, and still choosing not to confront it directly. And if this doesn't cross a line, then what does? What threshold actually triggers a response that matches the reality of the harm? Personally, because if tens of thousands of files, direct admission of enjoyment, and continued behaviour after intervention still result in a suspended sentence, then the line clearly isn't where people think it is. And that's the part that sits with people. Not just the case itself, but what it represents. A system that can see clearly, speak clearly, and still act in a way that very much feels completely detached from both. Call it broken, call it compromised, call it corrupt, call it something darker. But whatever label gets applied, the underlying issue remains the same. When accountability becomes conditional, justice stops being consistent. And when it stops being consistent, it stops being trusted. Let me know what you think in the comments. Look after yourselves and check that judge's laptop.